The COVID era is notable for many things around the world, but in the field of finance, one of the most interesting artifacts of the early 2020s has been the surge in retail trading activity. There may be many explanations that other people have, but for me, it comes down to this. First, COVID resulted in more people than usual working from home, or generally with a little bit more time on their hands than usual. Second, the rise and availability of apps like Robinhood or Webull, among many others, brought with them exceptionally easy access to stock trading, along with very low or non-existent fees. Third, here in the United States, direct stimulus checks left some people with more liquid cash on their hands than usual. And similar to a crime, this confluence provided the means, the motive, and the opportunity for regular folks to get into stocks in a way that few people anticipated. But if you're an unexperienced trading newbie in the market, what do you do now that you've got disposable funds and you're ready to make some quick money, but you don't really know where to start? Well, maybe you look to expert guidance, preferably cheap or free expert guidance. As it turns out, it's relatively easy to pass yourself off as an expert on the internet. If you can get a little bit of traction, at some point, the growth and the followers just feed into themselves, and social media investing influencers found themselves with hundreds, if not thousands, of relatively inexperienced traders willing to put their money wherever the expert told them to. After all, recent history had provided plenty of anecdotal evidence that if you could just hit the right stock or crypto coin at the right time, you could generate thousands of percent returns in a very short period of time. These lottery ticket-like results can be very difficult to resist for a trader who's also probably depressed in the midst of this global pandemic. And it's easy in those moments to dream, what if? What if it worked? What if I became the next roaring kitty? And some influencers out there may have taken advantage of this. Now, in what follows, let me say that I'm not a lawyer. This is my own interpretation and opinion of a legal case, which I feel I understand, but I would stop short of saying that I'm an expert on every legal aspect at play here. On December 14th, 2022, the SEC announced charges against 8 social media influencers, accusing them of executing a coordinated pump and dump scheme in a case known as the United States versus Constantinescu. And I'm almost certain that I'm not pronouncing that right, and I'm also certain that a bunch of people that run Linux will be here quickly to inform me of the correct pronunciation. So, pump and dump schemes. This term, pump and dump, generally refers to a trading strategy where a trader initially sets up a position in a security without any sort of real public disclosure. This allows them to accumulate a lot of shares without much in the way of price impact, gaining them the lowest possible position cost. Then the trader goes out and they try their best to drum up public interest in that security, hoping that a large influx of buy volume pushes the price up. They can then sell their shares that they've already got into these rising prices and capture quick, easy profits. The entire scheme is dependent upon that trader's ability to generate sufficient volume of trading in order to move the price in their favor. Because of this, pump and dump schemes often target small company stocks with low trading volume, as these small firms with relatively low activity end up being the easiest prices to move with relatively small amounts of money. And when we're talking retail investors, they generally can only bring a small amount of funds to the table. So in this case, the SEC alleges that the accused traders had used their influence on social media, be it Twitter or Discord, to encourage their followers to take positions in stocks, and then they would sell into the increased trading volume and upward price movements, all while continuing to tell the followers that they were still buying and holding all the shares. Right? Diamond hands, hold on, we're all going to the moon together, while in the background they were actually selling and making a ton of money. So let's look at one example that the SEC gives that focuses on this company called Torchlight Energy Reserves. And in the interest of full disclosure, this particular example is of interest to me personally because during 2021, I actually had a small position in a company called Metamaterials, or MMAT, which Torchlight merged with. And I did eventually sell out of that position for a small profit toward the end of 2021 and throughout part of 2022, and I haven't owned any of that stock since. Further, Metamaterials recently declared bankruptcy just last week on August 9th, 2024. So the SEC's complaint alleges that 6 of the named defendants started purchasing Torch stock on the morning of February 10th, 2021. Eventually amassing over 1 million shares combined by a little after 10 a.m. Immediately after this, the defendants started making posts to their trading Discord, and some of the defendants were also out posting on Twitter, speculating that the future merger with Metamaterials provided the potential for large gains. Now, within about 15 minutes after all this, the group had already sold almost half its shares into the now surging prices. The SEC claims that similar strategies unfolded the next day and over the next couple of weeks, and by February 23rd, the group had netted almost $900,000 in profits on Torchlight stock alone. Now we get to the real kicker of this story. On March 20th, 2024, the U.S. District Court dismissed the charges against all 8 named defendants in this case. What I find extremely interesting is the reasoning behind the dismissal. The judge didn't say that nothing had happened. They actually didn't rule on the facts of the case at all. The judge concluded that the SEC had failed to actually state anything that amounted to an illegal offense. Basically, the court said even if everything the SEC says happened, and this group was running this coordinated pump and dump scheme, that's not illegal. And now, look, this conclusion hinges on a very specific legal definition of what is a scheme to defraud. The court's reasoning went like this: a scheme to defraud by legal statute and precedent requires that the perpetrator obtain something of value from the entity that was deceived. But in a stock market, the money made from a pump and dump scheme does not necessarily come directly from anyone who was lied to. Traders who are in the Discord group or following on Twitter that traded into this scheme may have in fact lost money. And the defendants may have in fact made money, but the money lost by the victims didn't necessarily directly go into the pockets of the defendants. The court states that it's even possible that some people out there may have actually made money following the defendant's advice. In order to fit the definition of fraud, the victim's money has to go to the perpetrator. The court says this: the defense conduct harmed the investor's right to control their assets, their right to make an informed discretionary decision. But that's not the same thing as actually depriving them of their property. So in other words, causing someone to make an uninformed decision and then them losing their money due to that is not the same thing as actually lying to them in order to take from them yourself directly. The really interesting statement was that even though the defendants even said, quote, "we're robbing idiots of their money," end quote, but that only proved intent to defraud. That doesn't actually make it fraud legally. Even if the defendants actually thought they were committing fraud, that doesn't actually make it fraud. Now, the last significant action I can find on this case is that on April 5th, the SEC did appeal this decision, and as of the recording of this video, it seems that the appeal is still going forward. This all has also largely just focused on the criminal charges that the SEC brought. Civil charges are still outstanding at this time. So I'll wrap this up with just a couple of very obvious points and takeaways from this. First, if we just presume that the SEC's claims are at least a somewhat accurate representation of what actually happened here, this is at minimum a massive reinforcement of the caveat emptor principle. You have to understand that you are responsible for your own trades, and there could be people out there trying to deceive you with the express purpose of benefiting from your gullibility. You just can't believe everything you read on the internet, especially from anonymous accounts. And look, you gotta be aware that if the outcome of this case is that actions like this are actually legal, then don't be surprised if a lot of other people go out there trying to replicate the success that this group had. I know it sounds like the most obvious thing in the world, but be careful out there and don't believe everything you read on the internet.